Pacific Gas and Electric is California's largest utility company, and it has a massive wildfire problem.
The utility giant PG&E filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company facing billions of dollars in potential liabilities for its role in last year's deadly wildfires.
A new report out today on California's deadliest wildfire ever. The inferno north of Sacramento killed 85 people, destroyed 18,000 homes and buildings.
The Sonoma County DA has filed criminal charges against PG&E over its role in starting the 2019 Kincaid Fire.
5 of the 10 most destructive fires in California since 2015 have been linked to PG&E's equipment. With 25,000 miles of power lines in high fire threat areas, PG&E has spent the last couple years relying heavily on one simple way to reduce the risk of it causing a spark: shut the power off.
So it happened twice for almost a full week at a time, and we essentially lost that full week of service. We lost all of our food supply, we were not able to operate, we lost that revenue.
So now, PG&E is trying out a new solution for keeping the power on safely in remote areas. It's this small, standalone renewable microgrid in the mountains of Briceburg, California.
So this system is powering 5 customer meters, year-round, 24/7, 365.
PG&E is also building bigger backup microgrids as part of its $5 billion 2021 fire mitigation plan. It also includes 300 new weather stations to monitor for severe conditions, LiDAR, drones, and hundreds of cameras to provide 90% visual coverage of high fire threat areas, hardening the system by doing things like moving 23 miles of line near Paradise underground and more aggressive clearing of trees around power lines.
We must succeed. Civilization, California, our communities need all of us to come together to figure out how to solve all these things at once, to get clean, reliable, safe, affordable energy. Like, we have to. We are not just going to pack up and leave California.
We went to Briceburg to see the 5 customer microgrid that PG&E says is proof it's committed to doing better, and visited communities asking the utility to work harder at keeping their power on and keeping them safe. Keeping the power on for 16 million Californians is a big job. So is maintaining the integrity of more than 100,000 miles of power lines while keeping it clear of vegetation that could turn a spark into a deadly wildfire. All this while answering to California regulators and, as an investor-owned utility, shareholders.
The management of the company mostly tried in the years leading up to Napa, Sonoma, and Paradise to please shareholders by controlling costs.
The deadliest fire in California history occurred in Paradise in 2018 when a live wire broke free from a 99-year-old PG&E electric tower. It was 25 years past what PG&E considers its useful life. 85 people died.
There's one person who committed suicide in his home. As the fire was bearing down on him, he decided to take his own life rather than wait for the fire to consume him. So PG&E did not plead guilty to the death of that person, but they did plead guilty to the death of 84 other people.
Clearly there were oversights, and clearly we wish it hadn't happened.
PG&E is trying everything it can think of because it knows that, it needs to repair its relationship with the state of California.
By January 2019, PG&E was in bankruptcy. It emerged last year after agreeing to pay more than $25 billion in damages to insurers and 70,000 victims of the fires it's caused since 2015.
The way that we operated our electric system in the 20th century is no longer safe. We've got crumbling infrastructure as a country all over the place. This is not unique to PG&E.
Indeed, investigators in Southern California found San Diego Gas and Electric at fault for a series of fires that killed 10 people in 2007. Texas power companies failed to keep the power on during this year's winter storms. Portland-based Pacific Power is under investigation for the deadly 2020 wildfires. But a frontline investigation found that going back more than a decade, PG&E resisted spending money on preventative measures, saying wind-driven fire risk in its territory of Northern California was significantly lower than in Southern California. But while utilities in Southern California launched weather stations, cameras, and satellites after the 2007 fires, climate change has drastically increased the risk in the north. last year saw 5 of the 6 largest wildfires in California's history, all in PG&E's service territory. Since 2018, the simplest way PG&E reduces the risk of equipment sparks is by shutting it off in high-risk areas during dry, windy weather. It calls these public safety power shutoffs, or PSPS events.
There was a big fire in 2019 called the Kincaid Fire that was ignited by PG&E equipment. But because it was the only fire during a wind event that would have ignited many, many fires if the power hadn't been shut off, all of CAL FIRE's resources were dedicated to controlling it and containing it. And that meant that Healdsburg and Windsor didn't burn down.
PG&E had 9 power shutoffs in 2019, lasting from 14 hours to 7 days and impacting at least 1.3 million customers. That number dropped to 6 outages in 2020, impacting 650,000 customers. Despite earlier assurances they were temporary, PG&E says PSPS events are here to stay.
Public safety power shutoff is a tool that's probably going to be around for quite a while. California's not getting wetter, it's getting drier, it's getting hotter.
Just in those first couple outages, our losses exceeded $30,000.
Brennan Jensen is part of the quarter of California's population, 11.2 million people, who live in 4.5 million homes in the wildland-urban interface threatened most by growing wildfire risk. In 2019, she and her husband bought the 100-year-old Hotel Charlotte in the town of Groveland, a gateway to Yosemite.
In normal times, this would be a bustling restaurant. When you go through the whole process to determine whether or not to take over a business in a particular area, never in that calculus did we consider that our well-established major utility could turn off the power without any real notice.
6 months into running the hotel, their first PSPS outage lasted 7 days.
One of my employees who didn't have power for several days and had only an electric stove, called me late at night and was like, can I come to the hotel and use the propane stove so that I can make a bottle for my infant son?
Although PG&E does have a safety net program to reimburse residential customers up to $100 for things like spoiled food, losses during a public safety power shutoff are not eligible.
The food was really compromised and had to all be tossed. That was really unfortunate. Twice, in fact.
Residents in high-risk areas who can afford it are putting in generators to keep the power on.
We have seen an incredible amount of demand on Generac products in the last 12 to 18 months. From an order intake perspective, it doubled, even tripled for a while what we were used to seeing.
I was actually the primary operator of our generator throughout the time frame, not sleeping all through the night.
Jensen's generator is decades old. It was so cumbersome and costly to run during the long PSPS outages in 2019 that they opted to shut down their restaurant before the 2020 wildfire season rather than struggle to keep the power on at their own cost. One improvement came in 2020 when regulators started requiring more ample notice to customers when the power was going to turn off. PG&E also says the power came back on an average of 7 hours sooner in 2020 compared to 2019.
Power shutoffs are here to stay. They may get smaller, but they are going to be something that we have to live with for the time being until we develop technological alternatives that really work. And that's going to take time. We have to invent stuff to get our way out of this.
That's exactly what PG&E has done in one tiny remote area for now.
Historically, microgrids have been thought of as a backup. This is not the backup solution, it is the solution, and we think it's the first of its kind.
They are cranking right now because it's a very sunny afternoon. The big difference between this standalone power system and an off-grid solar system you might think of on a cabin in the woods, this thing is comparable to what a wire can provide. This system is also designed to stay energized during public safety power shutoff.
In April, this first-of-its-kind renewable microgrid started providing power to 5 customers, including 2 homes and the Bryceburg Visitor Center. They'd been living solely off a diesel-powered generator since a 5,000-acre fire destroyed their high-voltage line in 2019.
These customers are not paying for this directly. This is PG&E using its budget for distribution costs, we were going to have to rebuild this wire one way or another. We're choosing to rebuild it with this system instead.
PG&E commissioned Grass Valley-based startup Box Power to build a containerized microgrid powered by a minimum of 70% solar. It's similar to systems that Box Power deployed in Puerto Rico in 2018 after Hurricane Maria took out the power grid for nearly a year.
It's solar to batteries, and then the batteries maintain that. So at nighttime when the sun isn't shining, that's where the customer is getting their power from.
2 solar arrays pump power down to be stored in a lithium ferrophosphate battery bank in a fire-resistant shipping container.
In the event that there isn't enough solar, we do have the backup propane generators.
Just to make sure that you never run out of energy no matter what, because this is not connected to the grid. You can't get power from anywhere else. It's all produced right here on site.
Insulated lines then take the power up a fortified pole and across the Merced River to 3 of the customers.
600 or 700 feet over across the river to the homes that are now being served off this system 24/7.
2 similar remote grids are already in the works, although they're facing permitting issues due to the presence of threatened species. PG&E is aiming to have 20 standalone remote grids operational by 2022, with plans for several hundred more.
Within 3 to 5 years, you'll be able to look at and say, this was not just a one-off, but wow, this is a pattern.
Isolating standalone power systems like this means fewer miles of wire and fewer chances of sparks. PG&E is helping build another 100% renewable microgrid in Humboldt County, too. It'll power 18 customers, including a regional airport and a U.S. Coast Guard station. And then there's 11 larger microgrids being built as backup power for whole communities, powered by diesel generators that kick on during PSPS outages. Groveland was supposed to get one last year, but PG&E says it's now delayed until the end of this year.
It would be nice to have some better communication and realistic timelines so that we can properly prepare and come up with alternative strategies in the meantime.
Jensen, who worked as an environmental scientist and consultant before running Hotel Charlotte, says that PG&E should be powering all its microgrids and more with renewable sources like in Bryceburg.
I hope that they adopt a renewable approach that they commit to scaling and replicating throughout the state. This is the opportunity to be able to do this.
A few miles outside of Groveland, Jensen's friends Deborah and Kevin Kilkowski run a 4-room bed and breakfast and small ranch.
So these 2 horses you see here, these are Arabians.
When PG&E shuts the power off, Kevin uses this tractor to haul 5 generators down from their upper farmland to keep the business operating.
This is a 3,000 watt, this is a 2,000 watt. We have 2 of these.
In 2013, we had to evacuate our guests. Yeah, that was like our first year. Oh my gosh, I'm opening a business and people are trying to come to Yosemite. There's a fire and everything gets shut down. Luckily, in our situation where it's unique, I can fall back on Kevin.
Kevin owns a forestry business that's booming because people hire him to clean up after PG&E comes in to cut down a rapidly growing number of trees around power lines on private land.
PG&E has fallen hundreds of trees on some of our projects, depending on how the transmission lines run through that property.
In 2017, 4 fires in Napa broke out when trees hit PG&E power lines. Last year, the Zog Fire killed 4 people in Shasta County after a gray pine fell on a PG&E line.
It's not an easy job. Are they going to protect the community? Are they going to keep people powered up? Are they going to try to maintain the integrity and the aesthetics of the forest?
Aside from equipment failure, the leading cause of ignitions in high fire threat districts is vegetation coming into contact with power lines. So in 2020, PG&E did what it calls enhanced vegetation management along more than 1,800 miles of power lines. This means that in addition to clearing all growth within 12 feet of a line, PG&E evaluates any tree tall enough to strike a power line and potentially cuts it down. PG&E determined that 5.3 million trees have the potential to strike their lines in high fire threat areas. Its 2021 plan calls for another 1,800 miles of clearance like this, and it adds 200 inspectors and full 3D imaging with LiDAR to check for issues after it clears an area.
Until this year, they took the position that the trees, the lumber, was the property of the landowner, and so they weren't going to remove it. But if they just leave it, That's a huge risk, right? You've got dead fuel on the forest floor in a high-risk area next to a power line.
You can rake every leaf, you can move your wood pile, you can do different things. But there is nothing the homeowner can do about the fact that the wooden pole in your backyard is likely suffering from dry rot and is at risk of collapse.
With so many fires caused by failures of aging or improperly maintained equipment, PG&E has increased the frequency of inspections. And in place of what Camp Fire prosecutors called a run-to-failure policy, it's started replacing parts before they fail.
We've got inspectors out looking at our transmission towers. We've got helicopters and drones using aerial imagery and LiDAR and other technologies to keep eyes on the system and make sure that every piece of line that we have traversing a high fire threat district gets some form of human or technological eyes on it, and we can then prioritize the maintenance work accordingly.
Despite lofty goals, PG&E admitted to regulators in May that it failed to carry out inspections on more than 50,000 poles last year, 3,000 of which are in extreme fire risk areas. And it recently disclosed that flawed inspections mean more than 500,000 aging poles are at risk of dry rot. It's committed to proper inspections by the end of the year.
They are all at risk of collapse. Why are they pushing these poles past their useful life?
While PG&E has made major missteps, providing power is inherently full of risk. The U.S. power grid has close to 7 million miles of power lines, and much of it was installed decades before fire risk was high enough to warrant insulation that helps prevent sparks.
It is the world's largest machine, right? And then if you were to run it around the circumference of the Earth, right, the electric grid would go around the circumference of the Earth several times. So the number of miles is staggering. Yet, we are still doing things like we did in 1889.
And with the state's wildfire burn area projected to increase 77% by the end of the century, the need for rapid progress on fire prevention has never been greater.
We have an energy system that's been built up over many, many decades. 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years. We don't have 50, 60, 70, 80, or 100 years to rebuild it or to transform it.
It's going to require a lot of nimble, quick responses and significant investment. And I hope that PG&E is up to the challenge.